Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. Time for another show, but I don't think he'll be bringing you a full reading of the show. We'll just do a sort of a 1 hour going out of town special, just because there's something I feel like I need to put on the record, and I need it for a travel day today. No big deal, nothing wrong, nothing bad going on, just got to be away from the microphone today, and was just dying to share this story with you, so I will. And here's what I've got, and we should probably just get right to it so that I can see if I can, in the normal amount of time, one, get through the article, and two, squeeze in something else that is new news that we would otherwise definitely be talking about today. But this story also has just got to get on the record. I am talking about, and now you too, we'll be talking about a piece in Rolling Stone. Adam Rawnsley and Aswin Subsang, who I just at some point should just contact on Blue Sky and say, you know, can you just discreetly tell me how to pronounce your name and so I can get it right from now on. Anyway, this a December 8th piece again in Rolling Stone, just kind of astonishing in its premise and not enough talking about it, and maybe it's because it's a super long article, and now you'll know it. And it kind of comes under their heading here of Start the Steal 2024. This is inside Trump's plot to corrupt the 2024 election. As you already know, I'm about to do that. But to do it with garbage data. What the hell's going on here? Well, the subheader explains, for more than a decade, election officials have relied on a system to reduce fraud, because we say we all want that, and boost voter registration, because we say we all want that, except now Republicans no longer say they want that. And they're getting rid of the first part too, reducing fraud. Trump's cronies are sabotaging it state by state and trying to replace it with something more MAGA, i.e. something that they can manipulate and steal, or at least they think they can. I have a feeling that it may turn out that the system doesn't work very well, but it doesn't actually have to work at all in order for its purpose to be achieved, if I understand what's going on correctly here. We'll get right to it. Of all the strange, conspiratorial, and potentially dangerous theories Donald Trump and his allies came up with in the days after the 2020 election, this was the strangest, the most conspiratorial, the most potentially dangerous. Millions of electronic ballots for Trump had been, quote, deleted, and hundreds of thousands more had been, quote, switched to Joe Biden. Trump and his cronies in media, political, and legal circles insisted, thanks to software designed at the behest of Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez to rig foreign elections. Never mind that Chavez had been dead since 2013. Still is, by the way, I checked. Never mind that even Fox News' researchers said the claims about Dominion voting systems were, quote, 100% false. Fox ultimately paid Dominion $787 million after its hosts ignored the network's research department and spread lies about the firm. But the consequences his allies have faced for pushing lies about the 2020 election have not diminished the former president's appetite for conspiracy theories. If anything, they have only stoked it. And as you know, there's no reducing Trump's appetite of any kind, I'm sure. Since then, well, there's one kind that's probably been a little bit reduced. Since then, though, Trump has fixated on new boogeymen. Lately, he has found one in a mundane nonprofit designed to spot the very voter fraud that Team Trump professes to hate. Until recently, 33 states and the District of Columbia, a mixture of solidly Republican, Democratic, and battleground states, used data from the Electronic Registration Information Center. Eric. You'd think he'd like Eric, but as it turns out, what do you know? He really has just no love in his heart for Eric at all. And I guess, in fact, a sort of sneering contempt for Eric. Just strange to me. But anyway, The Electronic Registration Information Center has been used to spot voting irregularities and to identify and reach voters who haven't yet registered. A group that numbered 4.4 million people in 2022. Eric has been employed in this way since 2012, without incident or controversy. But in Trump's imagination, Eric is the engine for election rigging, because why the hell not? Basically. The why the hell not part, okay, that's my own addition to the piece. Last March, I'll try to stick more faithfully to it. You'll know when I'm departing. Last March, on his social media platform, Trump fumed that Republican governors should, quote, immediately pull out of Eric. I'm not gonna go back over that sentence. And falsely labeled it a terrible voter registration system that pumps the rolls, that's a quote, pumps the rolls for Democrats and does nothing to clean them up. Over the past year, Trump has remained fixated on Eric. Sources who speak to him say he's gone so far as to wonder aloud what can be done in the future to make it illegal nationwide, while key allies have begun a largely under-the-radar effort to market a replacement system. One person close to him has dubbed Eric Trump's New Dominion. That's so confusing given the fact that his son is named Eric. But okay, but you see what he's doing here? Well, this thing, it's harmless and it prevents voter fraud and it helps ensure the accuracy of the count. Let's make it illegal. Let's replace it with something that we make here at Trump. The Trump companies, the Trump Corporation. We'll make our own. The Trump Organization. What the hell does he call the place? Oh, yeah, right. Doesn't matter. It's going to be dissolved anyway. Just like Dominion, or should we say, just like the Dominion in Trumpland's fever projections, Eric is part of a larger architecture of voter fraud, one that has to be ripped out and replaced with a MAGA alternative before America goes to the polls in November. Stop the steal. Diehards are vying for spots in the 2024 campaign legal team. MAGA attorneys are challenging laws that make it easier to vote in Democratic strongholds. Trump's allies continue to question the integrity of the vote, even if polls show him slightly ahead. Because there can be no question about the final tally in the Trump inner circle's view. There is only an election that ensures the right result. Trump's restoration to the White House. You've probably never even heard of Eric. We heard of it once or twice. Until now. You'd have no reason to. So here's a brief primer. Eric was created in 2012 by the nonpartisan Pew Charitable Trusts. It started with 7 original member states with the goal of helping modernize their outdated, often paper record-based voter registration data, and offers trustworthy information to clean up voter rolls of deceased or ineligible voters. States are then able to securely share specific information about voters, like the last 4 digits of a social security number or a driver's license number, to eliminate any confusion about who a voter is and whether they're eligible to register. John Merrill, Alabama's Republican Secretary of State, was a fan. Having access to a pool of specific information about who's eligible to vote and who's not seemed like a gift. But when he traveled a couple of years ago to Washington, D.C., where renowned conservative attorney Cleta Mitchell was hosting a private 4-hour meeting for secretaries of state, he found himself in a lonely minority of Eric supporters. At that meeting, Mitchell made herself clear. She wanted these secretaries of state to pull out of Eric. It was being used unfairly, quote, to promote more Democrat registrations, Mitchell complained. According to Merrill's recollection, what's more, Eric was actually created and funded by George Soros. Yes, that probably warrants the dramatic music for sure. He, of course, the liberal billionaire donor and ultimate bête noire among Republican or GOP politicians and right-wing media. Basically, they wanted to talk about why we needed to get rid of Eric, Merrill tells Rolling Stone. And this was, to Merrill's ears, odd. He knew Mitchell was a Trump ally. She served as a Trump 2020 campaign attorney and sat in on the infamous January 2021 phone call in which the former president demanded that the Georgia Secretary of State, quote, find him 11,780 votes to overturn the state's election. Much more than that, in my own recollection. Where can I find this thing? I think it's not that easily accessible. Too bad, because my favorite moment of the call I used to have in Soundboard, and I moved it out of Soundboard. Unless did I put it in the other section of Soundboard? Maybe that's it. Oh well, not that easily found, but there it is. Okay, my favorite. And you have to remember what happens here in order to pick it out, because unfortunately it's not as clear as it should be. But
we found a way another state's later. Excuse me. We found a way another state's later. Excuse me.
That's right. My favorite part of the whole Trump phone call: Trump actually audibly farting during the phone call, such that he has to actually excuse himself as well. That's probably my favorite moment of the whole thing, and no one's ever going to convince me otherwise. Okay, so where were we? Cleta Mitchell was on that call, and I think that's the most important part. Cleta, I have to tell you something. Pull my tiny fingers.
We found a way another state.
Excuse me. All right. Well, at any rate, Cleta Mitchell had to sit there and smell that while sitting on the phone call. So I think that's, some people would say punishment enough, but I don't think so. At any rate, that was the call where Trump, of course, demands that the Georgia Secretary of State find him 11,780 votes and also excuse him for farting to overturn the state's election. Merrill was a Trump fan himself, but this Soros stuff was bizarre. That's true. It is kind of weird. Merrill adds, not from Cleta Mitchell or anyone have I ever seen any empirical data that would support the position that George Soros is involved in or related to or had any influence at all in the creation or in the administration of the ERIC system. He's just nowhere to be found, apparently. So Merrill spoke up. ERIC was an incredibly valuable tool in protecting and administering free and fair American elections, Merrill told the room. He proposed an information audit to determine whether any partisan third parties had been involved in the nonprofit, whether it had adhered to its bylaws, and whether it had used its budget appropriately. Well, they were very cool to my position, Merrill says. That meeting was just one part of what has become a sustained pressure campaign against ERIC, which has risen to the highest levels of the Republican Party, that involves angry demands from the former president, conspiracy theories in far-right media, and GOP secretaries of state too willing to give in to them. 9 Republican-led states, 9 Republican-led states have left ERIC in the past 2 years. Trump-aligned activists' efforts to discredit the system and strong-arm states into withdrawing opens up the possibility that departing state members, including a number of key 2024 battleground states, could face chaos on Election Day and afterward. Their voter lists are likely to be significantly less accurate. David Becker, who helped create ERIC, says of the states that have left the nonprofit, Becker resigned from the organization in 2023 following a right-wing pressure campaign against him. There will be old records on the voter lists of people who are no longer eligible in that state that will fuel false claims of potential voter fraud. And there will be inaccurate records of those who are eligible in the state, who moved within the state, that they likely will not catch. That's a huge problem. Faulty voter files create long lines on Election Day, delays in getting mail-in ballots, an increase in provisional ballots, and delays in determining a winner, Becker says. The bigger potential damage here is that election losers, people who have lost an election or perceive themselves to be about to lose an election, will have more time and more space to create false narratives about an election being stolen. The more problems at the polls, the more lines, the more provisional ballots, the longer it takes to count overall ballots and get an unofficial winner, those all feed into the potential for chaos and even incitement to violence by election losers. In other words, the 2024 election could see the same maelstrom following 2020. The sprawling conservative quest against Eric appears to have begun in earnest in the swamps of conspiracy theory media. In January of 2022, the pro-Trump blog Gateway Pundit, boy, they're in the middle of every piece of garbage ever, published a 3-part series accusing Eric of being a secret plot by Soros. Right. A secret plot by Soros to create a left-wing voter registration drive disguised as voter roll cleanup. It's a far cry from the boring but necessary work Eric actually does. In addition to checking for outdated voter information, it produces reports on citizens who are eligible to vote but unregistered. Once every 2 years, Eric requires its participating states to conduct outreach to those eligible but unregistered potential voters and offer them information on how they can register to vote, often via postcards. Some Republican officials, including Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who withdrew his state last year, have objected to that requirement, writing that, quote, members should not be forced, unquote, to conduct such outreach if they don't believe it's necessary or relevant. But it's hardly the stuff of florid conspiracy theories spun by the Gateway Pundit. When the site ran its series on Eric, 33 states were members of the nonprofit, but after Louisiana Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin, A-R-D-O-I-N, announced that he would suspend the state's participation in Eric following concerns from the public about, quote, potential questionable funding sources and, quote, possibly partisan actors accessing Eric's data. Based on what? Nothing. As the right-wing conspiracy meme gained steam, 8 other Republican-led states, including critical 2024 ones such as Virginia, Ohio, and Florida, followed suit, leading Eric membership to plummet to 24 states and the District of Columbia today. Okay. So, by the way, when did that happen? In Virginia, is that something that, where was it? Did they give a date in this? I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that's Mr. Moderate, Glenn Youngkin doing the moderate thing, leaving the nonprofit that was actually helping secure and keep fair our voter registration rolls and elections. Golly gee. And he doesn't even have another election to run here. When the site ran its series on Eric, again, 33 states were members, but afterwards, after Louisiana left and led 8 other Republican states out, we're now down to 24 states and D.C. I'm disappointed that some of my fellow secretaries of state would surrender to the conspiracy theories, says Adrian Fontes, the Democratic Secretary of State in Arizona. If they care about voter file accuracy and integrity, they don't. Eric is the only tool available to make that a reality. Pennsylvania's Secretary of the Commonwealth, Al Schmidt, says the perversity with a lot of this is that the arguments against Eric are allegedly coming from a place of interest in election integrity, when in reality, Eric is quite possibly the most valuable, useful tool that we have to strengthen election integrity. A Republican who considers himself a hawk on election integrity issues, Schmidt served as Philadelphia City Commissioner and helped investigate instances of voter fraud that led to federal prosecutions. But the theories about Eric began to spread. It became such a big thing, says Merrill, the former Alabama Secretary of State, that he worried certain allies who do not have Trump's best interests at heart would try to sway the former president into waging war on Eric. Merrill says he's had several conversations with Trump over the past year to make it clear he's steadfastly pro-Eric. During these brief talks, including a 30-minute breakfast at Mar-a-Lago, Merrill told Trump to call him any time if he wanted to understand the benefits of Eric, why its conservative critics were dead wrong. Well, guess what? It didn't work. Though Merrill says the former president politely listened to his defense of Eric, Trump has yet to take him up on his offer. In fact, in the time since that breakfast, according to other sources close to Trump, the ex-president went in the opposite direction and only fell deeper into the Eric-hating lore. At different points this summer, Trump vented about Eric to some of his lawyers and campaign staff, simply referring to it as a, quote, really bad system created, quote, by George Soros that needs to be, quote, taken out. You can't even, weave together a sentence for this guy. A rep for Soros's Open Society Foundations has said it never funded Eric. A spokesman for Trump did not provide comment for this story. Trump's plan for the 2024 elections extend well beyond meddling with Eric. The former president was removed from the White House, he believes, because his allies were weak. Not like Trump, who has called for, quote, the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, to nullify the 2020 election results. Trump has spent the past 3 years moaning to friends at his clubs, to conservative lawmakers, and to political advisors that Democrats will try to cheat again, and that the GOP must do everything it can to make sure liberals are stopped, according to 4 people familiar with this matter. One key component, making sure his government in waiting is stocked with people truly tough on supposed Democratic rigging in elections. The former president has pushed for us to hit the Democrats on all sides in the upcoming election, says a person close to Trump who has spoken to him about this matter multiple times. Back in early 2021, then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi proved to be one of his more potent enemies, pushing through an impeachment of Trump for his role in inciting the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana, on the other hand, was a dependable Trump ally, rounding up dozens of colleagues to sign on to the Trump-backed Supreme Court brief seeking to toss out the election and echoing Trump's lies about voting machines rigging vote tallies. Pelosi was gone soon thereafter, and in October 2023, MAGA Republicans elected one of their own to the position, Johnson. Not long afterward, Trump said he was pleased because Mike is good on elections. Not Mike Pence, but Mike Johnson, according to a source with direct knowledge of the matter. Ahead of the 2022 midterms, there was a large-scale attempt to place as many MAGA-friendly election deniers in as many key positions as possible, particularly in Secretary of State posts that could profoundly affect the 2024 outcome. That plan was dashed when the Democratic Party overperformed at the polls, forestalling a predicted GOP red wave. But with Johnson's rise, the leadership for congressional Republicans has only become more drenched in right-wing election denial. And think tanks and party bigwigs are providing a blueprint for what comes next. Project 2025, a policy conglomerate run out of the influential Heritage Foundation, is providing plans for how a re-elected Trump could revamp the Department of Justice and other independent bodies into little more than personal attack dogs to sick on his political enemies. And of course, you will note our position on this stuff, that this is not necessarily reserved for him winning the election, but just so long as he comes to power through whatever means, that will be enough for him. Plus, there are strategies in place for November 5th, 2024. Major party organs like the Republican National Committee are launching programs to recruit and deploy tens of thousands of GOP poll watchers and election integrity directors to battlegrounds in order to, in the words of Trump ally and RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, hold Democrats accountable for bad laws that make voting less secure, like getting rid of Eric. And in a December speech in Iowa, Trump asked supporters to go into Democratic cities like Philadelphia, Detroit, and Atlanta so they can guard the vote. Then there are mail-in ballots. They proved crucial for Biden's 2020 victory, and Trump has repeatedly called them a scam. So, over the past 3 years, MAGA Republicans in a number of states have passed bills attempting to restrict voting access, particularly around mail-in ballots. In private, Trump has made it obvious in his conversations with political aides and conservative grassroots leaders that he only views mailed-in ballots as wholly legitimate if they're sent in by his supporters. Finally, Trump needs lawyers he can trust, especially now that attorneys who helped his efforts to overturn the 2020 election have struck plea deals and cooperated with prosecutors in Georgia's Fulton County election interference case. A better, smarter legal team than last time is how a person close to Trump put it. Of course, basically, well, once you eliminate all the attorneys who are in jail, I guess that cleans up the rest. Maybe not. I don't know. Another person with knowledge of this matter says that the ex-president has already fielded meetings and phone calls from conservative lawyers who are, in the source's characterization, preemptively auditioning for roles on such a legal team, should one be formed next year. As recently as this summer, Trump has talked to right-leaning legal counselors about the feasibility of laying the groundwork for various post-election audits, quote-unquote audits, of mailed ballots, inspired partly by a shambolic Arizona audit following the 2020 election, in parts of the United States that have historical track records of so-called problems. Two sources present for these casual discussions recall, there are few more central to Trump's plans than Cleta Mitchell, who herself ought to be indicted and on her way to jail, but for some reason is not. That, of course, Cleta Mitchell, the lawyer pushing the secretaries of state to pull out of Eric at that D.C. meeting. As recently as September, Trump privately praised Mitchell's work, saying she is going to be, quote, very important in the next election and beyond. Once a member of the old school Republican mainstream, Mitchell has become the most ardent of election deniers, maybe as much as Sidney Powell, some might say, I would add. Along with participating in Trump's 2021 call with Raffensperger, she stunned a Fox News host on air in November of 2020 when she challenged the election results days after the network had already called the election for Biden. That embrace of Trump dogma has given her staying power in the former president's network of influential allies, but according to two people with direct knowledge of the situation, it irks some of Trump's top attorneys working on his various criminal cases, many of which grew out of schemes to overturn the 2020 election. Cleta is too militant, even for me, one such lawyer says. Mitchell sent a lengthy email in response to our reporting, which included insisting that Eric, quote, is a way to accomplish one of the left's objectives, and to do so at taxpayer expense. Register more people to vote. Not removing bad registrations, though it also does that. Mitchell offered up a number of her recurring criticisms of Eric, Soros, and Eric co-founder Becker, and noted, I am proud of the work that we are doing and have been doing for the past 3 years, and yes, I think that we are doing what we are doing to try to restore the rule of law in elections is very important. She also accused Rolling Stone of participating in attacks on election integrity activists, and also me specifically. Confusion has followed in the states Mitchell has persuaded to pull out from Eric. Former member states have found themselves suddenly deprived of accurate voter registration data and have scrambled to try to recreate a version of Eric through side agreements with their neighbors still in the network, says Schmidt, the Pennsylvania secretary. He's seen some states frantically search to find the most rudimentary public voter registration data. All you need is $20 and the ability to use Excel to do the analysis they're doing, he says. But absent the kind of very specific personal information that's only available through Eric, the data is going to be garbage and potentially result in voters being disenfranchised, according to Schmidt. You cannot just use, for example, name and birthday to go about taking steps to remove a voter, he says. That will result in a terrific number of false matches. The argument is more than theoretical. In 2005, Kansas, remember that jackass in Kansas? What was his name? Is he not mentioned in here? Chris Quebec, was it? Something like that. I can't believe I've forgotten. But at any rate, gee whiz, it had 2 Ks in it. Probably a third in the middle initial. I just don't know. Anyway, back in 2005, Kansas developed the Interstate Voter Registration Cross-Check Program. Much like ERIC, the network pledged to help states improve the accuracy of the data underlying their voter rolls by allowing member states to share registration information. But Crosscheck relied heavily on using registrants' names and birthdays to check for potentially duplicate registrations, leading to high rates of false positives. In one academic study of Crosscheck data, researchers found that the program wrongly flagged 99% of registrations. Wow. In 2019, Kansas agreed to settle a lawsuit by the ACLU and shut down Crosscheck following a data breach that exposed personal information of voters shared by the program. Thanks a lot. With the demise of Crosscheck, and as larger conservative-led states have walked away from ERIC, pro-Trump activists like Mitchell have promoted a new tool dubbed the Eagle AI Network. Everybody trusts AI, right? For states that have left the nonprofit. Eagle AI was developed in 2022 by John W. Richards, a medical doctor, great, sure, and a healthcare CEO from Alabama. Mitchell has a number of ties to Eagle AI, as the investigative watchdog documented, first detailed, including helping the group with strategic planning, legal advice, and hosting demonstrations of the software for her Election Integrity Network nonprofit. Eagle AI's developers hinted at their ambition for the software in an August article for Just the News, a pro-Trump outlet. In the article and company documents published with the piece, the company said it wanted the software to be, quote, the solution across the nation for use at all levels of voter roll validation, maintenance, and review. Yes, they'd love that, I'm sure. Can it do it? Is it any good? Don't know. In an email to Rolling Stone, Richards said that while Eagle AI could replace ERIC, doing so is not its mission. Eagle AI claims that hundreds of individuals and county election offices in 23 states have shown, quote, interest in using it. In December, the company gained its first government user in Georgia's Republican-dominated Columbia County, though the state's own director of elections, Blake Evans, said in a statement earlier this year that Eagle AI presentations that he has seen are confused and seem to steer counties toward unlawful list maintenance activities. But does that bother Trumpers? No, of course not. Unlawful. Who cares? I'll get pardoned. Schmidt, Pennsylvania's top election official, is critical of software like Eagle AI. The data sets that they're looking to use, such as property tax records, should not be used to generate a list of voters who are ineligible to vote, according to Schmidt, because plenty of eligible voters don't always appear on them. There's any number of spouses who do not show up on property tax records. No one who rents an apartment will show up on property tax records, or at least if that's their only residence. The software, he says, is utterly unreliable as a replacement for ERIC and would likely result in a terrific number of challenges to voters who are registered and are eligible, as well as litigation against states or counties who use it for those purposes. Richards tells Rolling Stone that property tax records are only a small part of the property data that Eagle AI uses. To say that Eagle AI data is utterly unreliable is also to say that ERIC data is unreliable. We use the same primary sources, he says. Richards acknowledges that Eagle AI does not have the personal protected information that ERIC has, like driver's license numbers and partial social security numbers. But, he claims, this does not make Eagle AI less accurate. It just means it has less accurate data to work with. And garbage goes in and beautiful diamonds come out. Eagle AI also markets its platform for use not just by state and county election officials, but by ordinary citizens to spot potential problem registrations for review and or election challenges. Aha. Conservative groups have already sponsored training sessions for activists to use the software, according to Documented. And Why would anyone doubt whether they are able to train people proficiently? I don't really know. Anyway, they just keep coming up with results that are favorable to Trump, and it's not because they're not trained. They are trained. They're just trained to come up with that. Anyway, even aside from its potential use in government, some fear activists could use software like Eagle AI to flood election officials with needless challenges to voters' eligibility. Eagle AI presents a few concerns, explains Andrew Garber, an attorney with the Brennan Center for Justice's Voting Rights and Elections program. One of them being that it seems to be a tool made to generate mass challenges. Garber says tools like Eagle AI that can facilitate mass voter eligibility challenges are concerning because of the effect that they could have on election administration. The people who run our elections have a lot to do. And when they get hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of challenges at the same time, they often have to investigate and come to determinations on those, which takes away time from their other really important work. He adds that such tools can also spread disinformation by giving the appearance that there's something wrong with the voter rolls, when in fact there isn't. Right? Send 10,000 challenges. Not only does it eat up their entire week, but you can say, do you know that we found 10,000 potential errors in the database here? This thing is rife with errors and fraud. It's not. All of your 10,000 challenges turned out to be bogus. Well, we won't get that answer for another week or so. So right now it's just headlines about the dangers. Richards dismisses such concerns, saying any challenges would be due to the fact that there are a high number of problem registrations, rather than anything to do with his software. He says Eagle AI will make county election officials more efficient at handling challenges because it makes finding evidentiary documentation more efficient and accurate. He calls allegations that Eagle AI could facilitate disinformation laughable. In her email to Rolling Stone, Mitchell defended Eagle AI, claiming Eagle AI is an alternative to ERIC, and as an alternative to ERIC simply means that it is a tool that will do what ERIC claims to do but doesn't. Well, ERIC doesn't claim to be screwing up elections, but it doesn't do that. And yet, Eagle AI will step in and take care of it instead. If Trump and his lieutenants get their way, it's possible that the failed efforts of 2020 and 2021, culminating with the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol, could be remembered as a mere dress rehearsal for whatever happens next, particularly if the presidential election is close. The hollowing out of ERIC has started, while Eagle AI begins to take root. The Speaker of the House is no longer just someone who will tolerate and back Trump's 2020 election lies, but is now a man who once took the lead on Capitol Hill in trying to nullify that election outcome. And no one and no organization in the Republican Party that truly matters is pushing back on Trump's authoritarianism. They're adapting to it, even when they aren't excitedly throwing their arms around it. In January 2023, Merrill stepped down as Alabama's Secretary of State 2 years after admitting to an inappropriate relationship that upended his political career. His successor, Wes Allen, worked fast to do what Merrill would not. Oh well. Secretary of State Wes Allen has officially withdrawn from the Electronic Registration Information Center as his first official act in office. A press release triumphantly announced. Still, as Merrill decries MAGA elite's assault on ERIC as a destructive endeavor, he nevertheless maintains common cause with even the most zealous of anti-ERIC conservatives. They all want to see Trump restored to the Oval Office come January 2025. Merrill tells Rolling Stone he is now running, unopposed, to be an Alabama Trump delegate for the 2024 Republican National Convention. When I spoke to Trump in August, I told him I would be helpful. Merrill says he's already given me some tasks. Well, how do you like that? And that's actually the end of this considerably longer than I thought article. But very interesting, of course, for us to land here, remembering the older days of electronic voting worries and the worry that you were really doing your vote casting on a black box that was programmed in unknown ways and by proprietary software that no one was allowed to examine, that, hey, I pushed a button and 10,000 other people pushed a button, and then it just told us what the results were, and there's just no verifiable record being made. And of course now you have a second and third and fourth generation of these electronic voting machines, some of which produce paper ballots or paper receipts of some kind. There's a process in place for validating the software and examining the software, et cetera, et cetera. Now, though, they propose, well, how about if we replace, instead of having black boxes registering and counting the votes, how about if we have black boxes registering and counting the people? Are you registered to vote? The meatball says no. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The black box says you're not allowed to vote, or you've been registered in another state, or you are not eligible to vote. Why? Based on what? Nothing. I don't know. It's black box. We can't tell you. It's proprietary. So they just moved the location in the process of the black box and say, hey, there you go. We've created a more efficient way of doing things. How is it more efficient than Eric? Eric gets it right and you get it wrong. No, that's just the thing that people who like Eric say, whereas we who don't like Eric say the opposite. Don't you see? Ours is better and theirs is bad. Why? How so? You've made 100 errors. Well, that's just because there's 1,000 people to be caught and we're catching more of them. I mean, it's interesting that they don't seem to think the same thing about the amount of fentanyl, say, that gets stopped at the border. That's actually a sign that they're working pretty well and stopping most of what comes in. No, somehow it's the opposite. I'm not exactly sure how that happens, but it just is. Well, anyway, we have to be on the lookout for this one. I don't know. No plan immediately springs to mind as to how you combat that, especially as, these states, these sovereign states, are able to swap their systems and just pick a black box in place of Eric. And, enough of them just say, I don't know what it is, but as it turns out, of the 10,000 additional people who voted for Biden, above and beyond those who voted for Trump in this state, 10,001 of them, oddly enough, are actually ineligible to vote. And we can undo their votes afterwards because this computer says so. We found 11,871 mistakes. Well, lo and behold, the results are reversed. Can you do that? Hey, what do you mean, can you? What kind of question is that? That's just not a thing. We don't ask that stuff. All right. Let me relate one other thing to you that I know is current story. Who knows what develops between pre-recording and actual showtime. But yesterday, a development in the D.C. case against Trump, headed up by Jack Smith. As you know, Trump pretty much objecting to anything and everything and making renewed claims of absolute immunity to everything. I'm absolutely immune for anything I did while I was president. And to tell you the truth, people have this weird idea that presidents can be prosecuted once they're out of office. And that's not true either. I'm absolutely immune afterwards as well. I'm just immune by having been elected, by virtue of claiming anyway, to have been elected in 2016 and forever thereafter. It is a unitary and perpetual executive theory that we have working here. I'm always immune from everything. And they attempted to jump in the way of things. I mean, this was a pleading of theirs from the outset, but rejected, of course, by normal people who are working as judges. And then the Trump team says, well, we'll appeal that, but we won't wait, of course, until after the outcome of the trial and then appeal the verdict based on the fact, in our mind, that the whole trial was should never have started because I am absolutely immune both while president and afterwards, and maybe even before, too. What the hell? We'll just throw that in there as well. And but rather than waiting until being convicted and then appealing the conviction, we want the interlocutory appeal. This trial shouldn't even move forward from whatever point it's at now without a determination from the court. And then, of course, when the court decides, no, there's no such thing as absolute presidential immunity for at all, first of all, whether during a presidency or certainly afterwards, well, then we'll just appeal that ruling, the interlocutory one, and take it to the D.C. Circuit Court and waste another month having briefings and hearings and oral argument. And then when it's rejected again by a panel of 3 judges, they will appeal for an en banc rehearing. And that they may get it, they may not, but they'll waste a certain amount of time briefing that and briefing why there should be this en banc rehearing. And then whether they get it or they don't, it doesn't matter, because they'll appeal it again to the Supreme Court, and then it'll take even longer. And then by that time, we'll have held the election, and everyone will have been standing around with their thumbs up their asses. I don't know why people do that, by the way. I have no idea. Like, there's a million things you could be doing if you're just looking to waste time. Your thumb does not have to be there. I mean, that may be where you want to put it. I can't really see the correlation. That's all. Anyway, so let's say, I mean, I don't really know what twiddling your thumbs is, but that just seems like a better use, quite honestly. But, you know, who knows what people who hang out at Pervalago prefer. Anyway, the point is that while we're all sitting around waiting to go on with this prosecution, they'll go ahead and hold the election and steal it and then just pardon themselves and render the whole thing moot. Well, Jack Smith had a different idea. Jack Smith, of course, could see this thing coming, as anybody can. Well, he's just going to end up being, taking this thing as far as he can, as close to the Supreme Court as he can get. So why not short circuit the process? We'll go directly to the Supreme Court with an urgent petition. We want a writ of certiorari. We want to come before the court. I want an answer to the question of whether or not there is absolute immunity for the president, both during the time of his presidency and afterwards. This theory on which Donald Trump bases his whole defense, at the outset anyway, I want it tested. I don't really, because it's not a real theory and I don't want to have anything to do with it. But what I really don't want is for us to have to brief Judge Chutkan on it, and then for us to have to appeal it to the D.C. Circuit, and then for us to have petition for en banc rehearing of the full D.C. Circuit, and then for us to petition that the Supreme Court intervene, and to waste all that time. All right. He thinks he's got some kind of spectacular constitutional theory. Let's take it to the experts. Okay, Supreme Court, we pose this to you directly. So let's see. Who do you want to read here? The Washington Post? You want to read Chris Geidner at Law Dork? Well, we'll follow up with his, or maybe we'll take a look at his first. He says his came a little bit further on in the timeline. Supreme Court takes first step toward quick review of Trump constitutional questions, jumping past the fact that Smith filed these papers asking for it. There was a reaction from the court, so we could go directly to that. The special counsel's office, of course, it says in the subheader here, wants Trump's constitutional claims to be resolved as soon as possible so that the March 4th, 2024 trial date stays on track in the January 6th related federal cases. So what does Chris have to say for us? Well, he reproduces the submission here from Smith, and probably should just read through it one of these days. But hey, we're trying to keep things shorter here. The U.S. Supreme Court, he says, took the first step Monday evening toward quickly considering constitutional questions relating to the federal prosecution of Donald Trump. Trump's lawyers to respond by December 20th. That's prior to the big day that's coming. That isn't Hanukkah or Kwanzaa. I don't know. Do we have to pay anything if we say that? I don't think so. And it's not like the Super Bowl or anything like that. But anyway, Trump's lawyers will have to respond by December 20th to a request from the special counsel's office that the high court take up a case over presidential immunity and related constitutional questions immediately. Special counsel Jack Smith has gone to the Supreme Court earlier Monday asking the court to take up and definitively resolve the presidential immunity and related claims without waiting for the appeals court to weigh in on the case. This case involves a paradigmatic issue of imperative public importance, the amenability to criminal prosecution of a former president of the United States for the conduct undertaken during his presidency. Smith and the lawyers in his office wrote in a filing at the High Court on Monday. The efforts to get the case to the Supreme Court now, Smith made clear, are largely part of his attempt to keep the scheduled March 4th, 2024 trial date on track in his case against Trump in federal court in Washington, D.C., relating to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan rejected Trump's claims that presidential immunity continues to protect him. Continues, you understand? Continues is how we usually say it. To protect him from prosecution, and that other stupid one, that double jeopardy prevents him from being prosecuted given that the Senate did not convict Trump in his second impeachment trial on December 1st. Okay. Well, his second impeachment trial wasn't December 1st, but I guess he made that argument. Right. Oh, that's when Judge Chutkan ruled no. On December 7th, Trump's lawyers filed their notice that they were appealing the decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, leading to Monday's filings by the special counsel's office. The primary request filed by Smith's office, called a petition for certiorari before judgment, because it is a request to hear the case before the appeals court issues a judgment in the case, was joined with a motion to expedite consideration of the petition, and if the court grants certiorari before judgment, the merits briefing. The public importance of the issues, the imminence of the scheduled trial date, and the need for a prompt and final resolution to respondents' immunity claims, as dumb as they are, counsel in favor of this court's expedited review at this time. Smith and Michael Dreeben, listed as counselor to the special counsel and counsel of record on the petition, wrote in the request for expedited consideration. Dreeben, new to Smith's team, had been a longtime government lawyer and has had more than 100 oral arguments before the court. On purpose. He's a lawyer, you see, and wasn't arguing about the parking spaces. Hours later, the court granted the request, ordering Trump to respond to the cert petition by 4 p.m. December 20th. If the court grants cert before judgment and agrees to hear the merits of the case now, Smith and Dreeben asked the court to hear the case itself on an extremely expedited basis, with briefing completed over 3 weeks. Their precedent for that? U.S. v. Nixon, and some excerpt of their recitation of precedent. If the court grants the petition, the government requests that the court establish a briefing schedule consistent with the framework of the court ordered in U.S. v. Nixon in 1974. Under that framework, and consistent with the circumstances of this case, the parties would exchange and file opening briefs 14 days after the grant of certiorari, and any responsive brief would be due 7 days thereafter, with oral argument to be held as soon as practicable. The court may wish to order that amicus briefs supporting the parties be due on the date that the parties' briefs are due. The government is also prepared to comply with any more expedited schedule that the court finds appropriate under the circumstances. The court's near-instant response on Monday could foretell quick action going forward. In the fastest possible scenario, if the court grants cert, that's short for certiorari, if court grants cert in the days after Trump's response, briefing could be completed by January 12th, with oral arguments in the second week of the court's January sitting, which is already scheduled, but could have a day or afternoon arguments added. So that's where we stand. We'll see how quickly they turn that around, but it's good news that they've asked for Trump to respond by the 20th, because that puts some pressure on his lawyers. That makes them work faster than they really wanted to, and I don't know whether it's going to rattle them or cause them to make mistakes or not, but it'll get this thing out of the way sooner rather than later, and that's not what they were looking for. So it was a good idea to short-circuit this thing. Let me see what the Washington Post has about it, just to see if there's anything else we can't mine out of it. and wrap things up for today. Supreme Court will consider fast-tracking Trump appeal in D.C. trial, and as Chris Geithner pointed out, they've already at least fast-tracked the first thing that they had an opportunity to fast-track. The United States recognizes that this is an extraordinary request, Special Counsel Jack Smith wrote, calling it an extraordinary case. Devlin Barrett, Perry Stein, Robert Barnes, and Rachel Weiner teamed up for this piece yesterday. The Supreme Court said Monday it'll consider Special Counsel Smith's request for fast-track consideration. That's good. Let's jump around a little bit and abbreviate this if we can. The decision by the nation's highest court doesn't mean that the justices will definitely short-circuit the typical appeals process, but it means they are going to hear arguments from both sides about whether they should act quickly. There's still delay in all this. Trump's lawyers were told to file briefs on the issue by December 20th. The quick response by the Supreme Court came hours after Smith's office filed its request seeking to essentially leapfrog an appeals court process that Trump had already started, but which could take months to resolve. A lengthy appeal could slow the Justice Department's push for a March trial for Trump, who, by the way, still frontrunner for the GOP presidential nomination. It is unusual for the government to ask the court to disrupt the judicial process and to do so quickly. The United States, of course, recognizes that this is an extraordinary request, and then, as the subheader said, well, it's an extraordinary case. He added that without special intervention, the Supreme Court might not be able to consider the issue before the justices complete their term in June. The timing of Trump's 4 criminal cases is of paramount concern to both prosecutors and the former president's legal team. Smith has also charged Trump in Florida with allegedly mishandling classified documents and obstructing government efforts to retrieve them. In addition, Trump faces state charges in New York for alleged hush money paid during the 2016 election and in Georgia, alleging a massive conspiracy to undo the 2020 election results in that state. In the face of the 4 indictments, Trump has, of course, denied guilt and tried to push his trials beyond Election Day in November. Smith's latest legal gambit aims to keep the Washington trial on its current schedule. That schedule calls for Trump's D.C. trial to begin one day before the Super Tuesday primary, underscoring how messy next year's political and legal calendars could be. It is of imperative public importance that the respondent's claims of immunity be resolved by this court, and that respondent's trial proceed as promptly as possible if his claim of immunity is rejected, the filing from Smith argues. The Trump campaign, in a statement, accused Smith of trying to interfere with the 2024 election, saying he is willing to try for a Hail Mary by racing to the Supreme Court and attempting to bypass the appellate process. There's absolutely no reason to rush this sham to trial except to injure President Trump and tens of millions of his supporters. This would be, in any other setting, a fantastic push for efficiency in the system. Those businessmen, they love efficiency. Why wait? Why have an intermediate appeals court deal with it? Maybe even twice before handing it over to the Supreme Court. Since it's an inevitability, you might as well just bring it right to the source. Trump's legal team had earlier asked Judge Chutkan to dismiss the charges against him, arguing that presidential immunity protects him from prosecution over his conduct during his waning days in office. Chutkan, who was overseeing the case, ruled against Trump, who plans to appeal that ruling. So what's the problem? We'll just appeal it to the highest court right away, right? That appeal, however, could take months and significantly delay the start of the trial. So Smith jumped over, of course, the whole thing and went to the Supreme Court. He argued in filing that Trump's legal claims of immunity are profoundly mistaken, as the district court held, but only this court can definitively resolve them. And isn't that the truth? He noted that in recent years, the court has granted requests to consider cases of imperative public importance before an appeals court had completed its review. So it's not a new invention by any means. Among them were challenges to President Biden's attempt to forgive student loan debts. They just did it. Review in a Mississippi abortion law that led to overturning Roe v. Wade. They skipped the process for that. And, of course, the proposed addition of a citizenship question to the census. Whenever they like it, in other words, they do it. So what's the problem? They don't like this one? All right. Well, in arguing that the justices should take up the issue of Trump's immunity right away, Smith cited the Supreme Court's landmark U.S. v. Nixon decision, which ordered President Richard Nixon to deliver White House tapes and other documents to a federal district court. The unanimous ruling said a president does not have absolute immunity from subpoenas or other court actions. The Supreme Court expedited consideration in the Nixon case and delivered its opinion 3 weeks after oral argument. Derek Muller, a University of Notre Dame law school professor, described Monday's filing as rare and said Smith was asking the Supreme Court for extraordinary relief. He said the Supreme Court is often reluctant to get involved when it doesn't need to, but that there is no harm in Smith making the request as he explores every legal avenue to ensure the case proceeds on schedule. March 4th sounds like it's a long ways away, but it's not, especially when you have multiple layers of judicial review and pending appeals, Mueller said. Smith's team is trying to wrap up things as quickly as possible to eliminate uncertainty. Trump picked 1/3 of the sitting Supreme Court justices during his 4 years in office, but the former president does not have a winning track record at the high court. The justices turned aside requests from Trump and his supporters to get involved in the challenges to the 2020 election results. It ruled against his claims that the presidency protected him from investigation and rejected his efforts to block release of his financial records. Last year, the court refused Trump's request to block the release of some of his White House records to the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, by a pro-Trump mob, of course, that was trying to heed his calls to overturn Biden's election victory. The justices also denied Trump's efforts to block a congressional committee from examining his tax returns after an extended legal battle. In his petition to the court, Smith acknowledged the question of criminal liability for a president is one the justices have not confronted, but a cornerstone of our constitutional order is that no person is above the law, Smith wrote. And he seems to be right about that. Well, at least he was in the past. The force of that principle is at its zenith, where, as here, a grand jury has accused a former president of committing federal crimes to subvert the peaceful transfer of power to his lawfully elected successor. No less, I would add. The government's brief was signed by Smith and members of his special counsel team that now includes attorney Michael Dreeben. We heard that from Chris's reporting on it. A former deputy solicitor general who has argued more than 100 cases at the Supreme Court. That must be getting passed around on a fact sheet. Dreeben also worked on the special counsel team of Robert Mueller, which investigated Trump when he was president. Smith told the justices at the same time, that he was asking them to step in. He was requesting that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit expedite its review of Chutkan's ruling. If the Supreme Court chooses not to bypass the appeals court, Smith said, it may wish to note that the Court of Appeals should proceed with sufficient dispatch to permit the court, the high court that is, to hear this case promptly during its currently scheduled arguments for the sessions of this term. In other words, if they won't bypass the appellate court, they should at least instruct the appellate court to move more quickly such that when the inevitable appeal from that court comes, it can move up to the Supreme Court with dispatch. The Supreme Court's last day of scheduled oral arguments is April 24th right now. The appeals court also responded to Smith on Monday, giving Trump until Wednesday to weigh in on the special counsel's request to fast-track the proceedings in that court. The 3 judges assigned to the case include 2 Biden appointees, Michelle Childs and Florence Pan, and 1 George H.W. Bush appointee, Karen Henderson. It is rare, but not unheard of, that the Supreme Court intervenes in a case before an appeals court decides the issue. Generally, the justices feel they benefit from the briefing before lower court judges and those judges' consideration of an issue. Smith's proposed briefing schedule in D.C. would give Trump 10 days to appeal Chutkan's ruling that Trump is not immune from prosecution. Smith proposes that the government get a week to respond and Trump 3 days to reply to that response. Even if the court agrees to that schedule, the appeals court judges can take as long as they want to render a decision. When Trump claimed immunity from any civil lawsuit over his actions on and around January 6th, for example, Oral argument was held in December of 2022, but the decision, with the appeals court ruling against him, just came out this month. So it's almost a year later. So you can see why you want to try to expedite things. Anyway, so it's a pretty entertaining claim, if not extraordinarily dangerous anyway, that Trump is making, that he's absolutely immune both as president and afterward. And of course, if that's the case, well, as many people on social media pointed out, well, if it's the case that a president can't be prosecuted either while president or afterwards, hey, doesn't that apply to the guy who's president now? Of course, it should by logic, but of course these are gimmitarians, so I guess it's entirely possible that they come up with some way of doing this or just baldly assert, well, Trump is allowed to do it and Biden isn't because, I don't know, reasons. And if there's 5 signatures on the thing, well, that's the law of the land. Sorry, it doesn't make any sense, but there you have it. But if they do leave this power in president's hands, well, then there's nothing stopping Joe Biden from taking care of the Trump problem once and for all through, various means, and some of which might otherwise be considered illegal, immoral, unethical, violations of the 10 Commandments, what have you. Sorry, he's just not eligible to be prosecuted for that. And of course, he can pardon himself afterwards or pardon anybody else who might carry the action out. And that would be up to and including actions taken against, sitting Supreme Court justices, such that new vacancies that he could fill came available. Wasn't a series of natural deaths necessarily, but hey, what are you going to do? The guy can't be prosecuted. So, it's a pretty dangerous precedent. You would think that the justices would see the folly of it. You never know for sure. And as you know, it's possible to be pretty wrong about these things. And maybe the Constitution is a suicide pact after all. We've all just misunderstood it to this point. Well, that'll be some case, and we'll have to watch how that goes. And it won't, I guess by December 20th, we'll see what sort of responses Trump's team can come up with in defending to the Supreme Court what they hung their entire case on just a few days ago. It's really interesting. It's just basically a whole big calling of the bluff. You don't mind making these stupid arguments to Judge Chutkan because, I guess the newspapers are paying attention, but you're gonna go to the Supreme Court and make this argument. I would think that'd be pretty embarrassing. But then again, another thing that would be pretty embarrassing would be for the Supreme Court to say, we never really thought that was the case before, but what the hell? You go for it. You know what? You're immune. And then for Biden to say, what? Then I can do... No, you just can't. You just can't. We're going to reverse it. We'll change our mind. Well, one of the things I may do is change you such that you're not around to change your mind. That could happen. You never know. And I'll just appoint people who think I can't be held accountable for that. In other words, at that point, it would just be stare decisis. That's what the Supreme Court said, and I'm just respecting tradition.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that'll wrap it up for today's special 1-hour edition of Kagro in the Morning show for Tuesday, December 12th. We'll be back live in front of the microphone tomorrow. See you then. Stay tuned now for Justice Putnam with West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.